All right, we will get started. So again, I'm Representative Jamie Becker-Finn. I think I know everyone who's on right now. So this is, I think, our third or fourth Zoom town hall meeting. We are doing something a little bit different this time, and that we're attempting to stream it to Facebook so that more people can participate. Hopefully, hopefully that's working. I don't have a good way to double check that. But we're always tweaking our systems and trying to make sure that more people can participate in what we're doing here. So just a couple other things to be aware of. We are recording this so that we can post it later so that other people who miss the town hall can still get the information that we're sharing and learn from what we're discussing. So if you are not okay with your face being on the video and being recorded, you can go click on stop video and you can still listen and participate even if your face isn't up there. So that's kind of up to you. It doesn't really matter to me, but I just like to let folks know that so they're comfortable with that and realize that it's going to be something that's out there for other folks to watch. So there's actually kind of a lot. I feel like a lot has gone on this week. And so the first thing I wanted to start with is that we, starting at the beginning of this week, our committees started to meet more often and kind of get back to more sort of a regular committee schedule. Obviously, nothing's really normal right now, but we are even busier than we were before, trying to get some committee work done and still doing what we can to make sure that we're making full use of the rest of the weeks of our legislative session so that hopefully we can get some things passed. On my end, for the committees that I serve on, in the Environment Committee this week, we moved forward the LCCMR bill, and that is a funding bill. It's essentially, it's the couple of cents per dollar that we make off of the Minnesota lottery that goes to the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. And so that is a bill that, we typically have that bill every other year or sometimes every year, kind of depending upon what the amount is in the fund. And we're really looking at that bill as almost an economic stimulus type bill this year, because there are projects throughout the state, and those projects, some of them are research projects. There's things about pollinators, there's extending the Lawns to Legumes program, all kinds of good things sort of throughout the state that have to do with protecting our natural resources. There's studies about protecting bald eagles from lead poisoning, a lot of really good stuff. And it kind of at this point when we don't know what our general fund is going to look like, and our budgets are not what we thought they were going to be at the beginning of this year. I really think bills like this are really important because these funds are coming from a different stream, and so the money is there, and so some of us are really pushing to make sure that hopefully we can get that done this year, because there are a lot of full-time jobs essentially that go into making those projects reality. So we're doing that tomorrow in the Environment Committee. I have a couple amendments. We'll have kind of a larger DNR, so Department of Natural Resources policy bill. So something that doesn't spend any money, but some policy things that we want to get done this year. It's Chair Hansen's bill, but I will be amending some things in there related to hunting and fishing, and a couple other things, the lands bill, and some other projects. Some other changes that the DNR has asked for to kind of make things easier. Nothing really COVID-19 related, except that a lot of our hunting and fishing and our state parks, all those things are funded by Minnesotans buying hunting and fishing licenses, paying for their state park permits, all that kind of thing. And so we do have some concern, obviously, when we have this stay-at-home order and everything's just sort of different, that we may not have as much money in those funds as we thought we would. And so, those things are important. I know our family, more than ever, is very appreciative of all the public parks and spaces that we have. and the ability to get outdoors when the four of us are all stuck in the same space for so long. So those are some things that we're doing on the environment side. And I will add, you can buy your fishing and hunting licenses online really easily through the DNR. So if you haven't done that this year, even if you're not sure if you're going to get fishing, it's still a way that you can support the work that the DNR does to protect our lakes and fish and other aquatic species that we take care of. So that's something easy you can do from your computer. And then the tax committee did meet. We met yesterday to sort of go over the federal changes related to tax policy and talk about some of the things we might need to change in Minnesota to conform with those federal changes so that when people file their taxes next year, it's not overly complicated. Well, any more overly complicated than filing your taxes normally is, and particularly filing your taxes after a pandemic. We're trying to not make that any harder than it has to be, because at the federal level, they did make quite a few changes. And then related to taxes, I did want to remind folks, we're past April 15th, but as we've talked about in previous town halls, the deadline to file your taxes was extended. And so, you know, if you're able to do it, and you know, if you're still working and you have the documents you need and all that, you should still file your taxes, particularly if you're expecting a refund that might help you out. Right now, you know, they're still processing all of our tax returns. And so the Department of Revenue does encourage folks to still file on time, or at least as soon as you can, so that, again, we don't want to have sort of that push right before the deadline in July, where we've got everybody trying to file before July 15th. And just, so if we can spread that out, that would be helpful for the folks at the Department of Revenue. So those are some of the issues that are going on in the committees that I serve on. There are some other COVID-19 related bills that are being heard and moving in other committees that I did want to share with you, because I think these are really important bills that I think can help a lot of people. And one of those is $100 million to go towards rental and housing assistance. And Representative Hausman and Representative Howard have been working really hard on that bill. It did have a hearing this week, and there is really a lot of agreement from different constituent groups and different, you know, whether it's renters or, you know, MICA and some of the other organizations, nonprofits that work in housing, as well as, honestly, landlords, because the landlords want people to be able to pay their rent too. And so pretty hopeful that we'll be able to move that forward. The Senate isn't 100% on board yet, but it's really important. And so we're hoping that can move forward, because there is a lot of outside agreement kind of across the board, regardless of what sort of political leaning you have. And so that's one thing that's currently moving in the legislature right now. Another thing is in the Education Committee. They had a hearing on making sure that our support staff at our schools are continuing to get paid. So essentially the paraprofessionals, a lot of the teaching assistants and other folks who work in our schools, who work directly with students who aren't able to do their work to the same degree they were when our kids were physically in the schools. I know some of those employees have been shifted to some of the food delivery and food packing, and still assisting teachers and getting materials out to students and things like that. But right now, some of those folks are not currently protected as far as making sure that they're still getting paid. And you know, we already kind of underpay people who work in those fields and those roles. So really, we're hopeful that can move forward too, so that we are making sure we're supporting those folks too, because we're gonna, when we do go back to school, we're gonna need all those staff people and those trained folks to be ready to go to help our kids. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on is in the Jobs Committee tomorrow, they'll be hearing another bill, a new bill to help additionally help small businesses, including what we refer to as sort of micro businesses. So really small businesses. The current definition of small business kind of changes depending upon who you're talking to. But as folks may have seen in some of the reporting in the last couple of days, the federal sort of stimulus that was supposed to go to small businesses. A lot of that money ended up going to businesses that fall on the larger end of small, and those with sort of more resources, while, you know, our mom and pop restaurant with 12 employees, you know, or the little coffee shop, or, you know, all those other kinds of like small businesses that exist in our communities that are, you know, some of us have for our jobs. A lot of those folks weren't able to access those loan dollars and those paycheck protection dollars before it all sort of got eaten up by the bigger players. And so, you know, kind of unfortunate, but also not surprising that that's how things went. And so this bill that's going to be heard tomorrow in the House Jobs Committee is really focused on actual small businesses and making sure there's kind of some protections in there to make sure that the folks who actually need that money are the ones that would be getting that money. And it's my understanding there's some other funds where there were funds set aside for certain purposes that due to the fact that we're in an emergency, that we can kind of repurpose. If we pass this bill, we could kind of repurpose those funds. So it wouldn't necessarily be all coming out of the general fund. And as I mentioned before, you know, if folks aren't working, then their payroll taxes aren't as high, and, you know, our whole economy is going to be impacted by this. And so we're all sort of operating at the legislature, you know, as if we're going to be in a deficit, because we are. And, you know, recognizing that this is really a time where we need to make sure that the other dollars are being put to good use that we do have available. So that's sort of the legislative update. We are, as I said at the beginning, we are very, very busy. I've had a couple days this week where I think I've been between Zoom committee hearings and different meetings. You know, I'm spending 5 to 7 hours a day on Zoom, making sure that we're still getting our work done just in this different way. And then those, I also want to let folks know that those committee hearings are, so they happen via Zoom, so it's very similar to this. They are recorded, and they are live streamed. And if you do want to provide testimony, if you go to the House website and you look at the calendar, and if there's a bill that you want to provide testimony for, there is a mechanism for you to do that, either via Zoom, if that's something you're comfortable with, or providing written testimony. So we're really doing all we can to make sure that the public has sort of the same access to weigh in and to give us feedback about the things that we're working on. A couple other things I wanted to touch on today, because I know we've had questions about this in the past. I'm going to see if Commissioner Frethem, are you ready to give us an update about property taxes in Ramsey County? I have my assistant is in charge of the muting and unmuting today, but I think she's got you off mute, and you can go ahead and give us an update.
Hi, hello everyone. So at the board meeting on Tuesday, we did approve a plan to waive fees for late property tax payments. So in essence, this gives the opportunity for folks who are impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic to defer payment until July 15th. We do have information on the county's website to see if you qualify. This is going to be homestead properties that are non-escrow payments. Obviously, we're not going to tell the bank not to send us the money. You've already paid them. Small businesses with tax burdens under $50,000, and then non-homestead properties that are rentals with 3 or fewer units, so small rental properties, letting folks delay their property taxes there. So again, you'll want to go to the county website to see if you're eligible, and then request a deferral. There are also other plans if you don't fall into one of those categories, but you have been impacted by COVID and you're struggling to make your property tax payment. There are other programs available as well that are just always available. So you can also find out how to apply there. And you know, just like with your income taxes, if you are able to pay, it's preferable that you pay now, because that property taxes, even though the county collects them, it's not just the county that uses them. Cities, school districts, and other taxing jurisdictions get some of those funds, and a lot of them don't have adequate cash flow or the ability to access that to continue to provide services during this time. And as we some of the work that we're moving forward with is looking at those financial implications for local governments. I'll be chairing the subcommittee on that to try to come up with a unified approach to how do we help our cities and school districts manage during this time so that we can present unified asks to folks like Jamie and our Congress representatives. So that's property taxes. I can answer any questions.
I think that was the big thing. I know I've been getting emails at my official house email address with folks asking asking about that, and obviously that's something that's up to the counties to do.
Yeah.
I know that we did get our Department of Revenue did get us a memo this week, kind of reiterating that the counties do have the power to do that. And I know Hennepin County and some other counties are choosing to give people options as well. All right, well, thank you, Commissioner. So the other thing I got, I was asked about, I was sent an email ahead of time, was about distance learning. So if you've been online today or been listening to the radio, it's expected today that the governor is going to officially extend distance learning through the rest of this school year. As many of you know, I have kids who are in school, so I'm living through that distance learning right now. My kids are in kindergarten and third grade, and it's certainly a challenge. But for families like ours, we do have high-speed internet, and we have the ability to do that. It's definitely challenging, but at the same time, I think the governor's doing the right thing at this point. Honestly, at least in Roseville schools, we're almost done with week 4 of distance learning, and the idea of like trying to transition the kids back to some other version that isn't even going to be the version of school that they were experiencing earlier this year, I think would almost be more disruptive for some kids. So I think the governor's doing the right thing and putting the health and safety of Minnesotans first. I do think it is, obviously, it's a challenge, and I've been working with a couple different other colleagues on making sure that we're addressing that digital divide. So, there's a lot of talk often about rural broadband and the access to high-speed internet in rural areas of the state. But actually, for example, my cousin lives in Knife River, which is north of Duluth, and her internet access is actually better than the friends I have who live in Chaska. And so, sort of depending upon where you happen to live and sort of how that infrastructure is set up, we do have areas of the state where it's not available. And then also, obviously, it's not financially accessible to folks there. Nearly all of our school districts statewide have examples of, families parking outside of a McDonald's or different places where there's free Wi-Fi and having to spend, hours at a time in the car with multiple kids trying to access their schoolwork that way. I do know, it's been my experience even before all of this. In some of our manufactured home parks, we have a lot of kids who live there, and they don't always have access to good internet access as well. I know too that our schools are offering, if you do need the paper version of the materials, that is available to folks. However, I know that at least for the homework that my kids are getting, a lot of that work is via YouTube and watching videos, and so making sure that all students have that access is incredibly important. We the Posse Caucus, People of Color and Indigenous Caucus, of which I'm a member, we have a call later today with the Lieutenant Governor and Governor Walz to talk about some of these education issues. And obviously there were disparities before, and those disparities have not improved under these pandemic conditions. And so I expect, in the coming days that the Walz-Flanagan administration will continue to give guidance and try to address some of these issues that we know we know already from distance learning thus far that there are problems. And but I don't know about if other folks have watched or listened to the 2 p.m. Phone conferences and video press conferences with Governor Walz, but I do think he and his team are really doing their best to make sure they're getting us, thinking through when they put out this type of executive order, what are the ramifications of that, and how can we make sure we're supporting folks. So, that's sort of the big news item. Obviously that's an executive order, so it's not something that, we as the legislature are necessarily putting out there, but I do support it. And there has been a lot of sort of confusion just in Twitter and Facebook discussions with folks about, just making it clear that, so these executive orders are executive orders. They're from the executive branch. However, the governor can't do everything, and any funding mechanisms have to come. Funding always has to be approved by the legislature. So, for example, as was rolled out yesterday, they are working with Mayo and the University of Minnesota to greatly expand testing, which will hopefully let us get some people back to work and keep our kind of frontline workers safer, and really help us address this pandemic better. But the legislature, I expect that we will be voting on something next week to get some funds out to sort of make that reality. I would hope that there isn't, that my colleagues and I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to get that rolling, because I'm very impressed by the press conference yesterday and the capability that they're talking about offering to our state. And the other thing is that just to keep in mind, is we test more people, we're going to have more positives. And as we, that doesn't mean they weren't positive before, it just means we know more. In addition to the fact that, if you looked at the projections even a month ago, we know that the number of people with COVID-19 is going to increase. It's just the way in which this disease progresses and has progressed in other states and other countries who are further ahead of us in dealing with this. And so today was, we had the most tests come back, the most positive cases confirmed, and unfortunately we had over 20, I think we had 22 deaths that were in those numbers that came out earlier this morning. And so, I think the expectation is that those unfortunately those numbers they're going to go up. And the hope is that we're prepared for it when it happens. And so I know that is our priority, both at the legislature and with the governor. So that's sort of where we're at. I didn't have any other questions from folks this week, but if anybody who's on right now would like to ask a question, or if our school board member wants to weigh in with anything, you're certainly welcome to. If you use the raise hand function, or sort of then Anna, my assistant, can take you off of mute as well. So I'll open it up and see if anyone has any questions or things they'd like me to comment on. It looks like Lonnie has a question. All right, I think you're off of mute, so go ahead.
Yes. My question, well, actually, I did email you a question, and I had, I don't know how many clicks to try and find you guys, but I finally got in, and so you may have already talked about it, and that was the question about election polling places and allowing some flexibility, as suggested by a lot of different people, and AARP in particular, for those, and for a number of different reasons. I don't know, have you talked about that?
Thank you for that question, Lonnie. No, we haven't talked about that on this call. So sort of where we find ourselves is that so Mary Kiffmeyer in the Senate, who is sort of their lead on elections issues, is not as enthusiastic about Secretary of State Steve Simon's proposal. So folks are aware of what's being proposed. So essentially, again, it's like a 5 times fast kind of thing. Secretary of State Steve Simon, his proposal is that we would, so for registered voters, not all eligible voters, but if you're already registered to vote, that you would automatically get a ballot sent to you in the mail. The idea being that we would increase the number of people who are voting by mail and cutting down on the number of contacts that we would have directly person to person. And programs like this have existed in other states. And I support this idea as well. I mean, I've voted by mail in the past or voted early, and we already have those options available and have been used in Minnesota, but we haven't done sort of the automatically mailing it out to people step. Right now, if you want to vote by mail, you have to request to have a ballot sent to you. And so trying to make it easier to make sure that people are getting that access without like navigating some online form or whatever it is that they need to get their ballot. And then what we've seen in other states is that when you increase vote by mail to that degree, the number of in-person polling places that are necessary is not as many. And so that, I think if that's a way that we can sort of save some money in setting up that many polling places so that we have more money to do the vote by mail, I think that's a good thing. And as we saw in Wisconsin, there's also the problem of we don't want to put our polling place volunteers at risk. And as I'm sure folks have probably noticed if you've ever voted, most of those volunteers tend to be our seniors and folks who are retired and sort of have the time and are just dedicated to making sure that we are able to vote. And we don't want to put those folks in danger by having them have to have, a lot of face-to-face contact with a lot of different people in an enclosed space. And so I actually had a friend who had never volunteered to be an election judge before, but he's in his 30s and he lives in Wisconsin, and he volunteered, a couple of weeks ago when Wisconsin had their election because, they really had to put the call out and we're low on volunteers to do the work. So I support Secretary of State Steve Simon's proposal. And actually, there was an interview that was posted online yesterday, about a 25-minute interview with Steve Simon from Tom Weber, who used to work for NPR, if folks remember listening to him on NPR, where Steve Simon really walked through sort of all the things that they're trying to take into account as they're looking at these proposals. So I will post that link to that interview on the Facebook page, because I think that is really good information, and you get to hear straight from Steve Simon as to how and why he thinks that this is a good plan that'll work for Minnesotans. So the chances of that actually coming to fruition as far as work in the legislature, I'm not sure. It looks like Anna already maybe posted a link in the chat function, and we'll also let Commissioner Frethem weigh in, because our counties also have a very important role to play in elections.
Whoop. Yes. So we are very closely tracking this at Ramsey County. We do administer elections for folks in the county, and we are hoping something gets done statewide because we believe everyone should have the right to safely vote. But if that doesn't happen, Ramsey County will be looking at our options to move forward. One thing we're already exploring is, can we just mail every registered voter a request to vote by mail? So you'd have to fill out the form and send it back, and then we could send you your ballot. So I think that's where we're at right now, but there will be a response from Ramsey County if something doesn't happen at the state level to reduce the number of voting places and the exposure for people.
Thank you. Lonnie, do you want to weigh in some more? I don't know if we need to unmute Lonnie so he can respond. There you go.
Yeah, Commissioner, I guess what I'm asking is, does Ramsey County have the power to make those changes and do those things regardless of what the legislature may do? I also heard that Amy Klobuchar on a news clip just this morning that she is introducing a bill in Congress about the upcoming elections to the effect of encouraging more online voting, and for all of the same reasons that we know about the elderly and particularly congregate living spaces, to the point where someone at the congregate living place, be it an administrator or whatever, should be deputized as an election judge, basically, and have the power to get their votes there and then turn them in so that they don't have to go anywhere, and just to make it easier for people to vote. And at the time, she said that it seemed very bipartisan, meaning that it seemed like something was going to go through. Now, if the national makes laws, or I believe that elections are basically state-run things, but if Congress makes some guidelines, are we obligated to follow those? Or I guess in the same vein, can Ramsey County do something as opposed to not being mandated by the state? So it's kind of, I'm really kind of confused on who has the authority to do what.
Well, and it certainly doesn't help. You know, Ramsey County, we're unique as a home rule charter county as well. So we may have more authority and opportunity to do things than other counties in Minnesota would if there isn't a statewide solution. I'll say in general for this pandemic, as we've been working through issues, when we approach something like this, a question of policy and what can we do and what are our options, our approach has been to stand up a subcommittee with other local leaders and explore and make recommendations that come back to the board. So that's how we got to the property tax proposal. Is we had a property tax policy subcommittee. We worked with not only folks at the county, but also at the city and school district level to make sure that nothing we proposed really undermined their needs. So if something doesn't happen at the state level, I expect that would be one of the subcommittees that would get stood up to look at what are all of our options on the elections front to make them as safe and secure as possible. What authority do we have as a home rule charter county, and what are going to be the costs for each of those proposals, and how can we find those funds, and do we have access? You know, is something we didn't budget for. Obviously, it's possible that if we're responding to the COVID-19 pandemic to make our elections different, it's possible we can use some of our allocated CARES dollars to do that, because they can't supplant existing budget, but they could cover those extra costs. So I don't know what the solution would be, because right now we're still hoping and waiting through this legislative session to see if something gets done statewide. But if it doesn't get done, we will be exploring all the options and looking to how we can make them as safe and secure as possible. So I don't have the solution now, but this is something, actually I raised it in the very first meeting when we approved the emergency declaration. Two of the things I brought up are how is this going to impact our census count? Because we're not, if we're not allowed to go door to door, we won't have census takers. So, and I know the census has been looking at that, but then also how is this going to impact our election in November, and how are we going to address that? So this is not far from our minds, and right now, we think the smartest course is to wait and see if something happens statewide while we're addressing some of the other issues that are going on.
Thank you.
All right. And then Keely had put a question in the comments, curious about a potential TCE bill and if that might move forward this session. So to remind folks who maybe don't live as close to that area, so TCE is a toxic chemical that essentially was illegally released into the air by the Water Gremlin Company in White Bear Township, and sort of the radius around that company of the folks who are likely exposed to that chemical included Gem Lake, which is part of my district, as well as parts of White Bear Lake, I think a little bit of Maplewood and White Bear Township. And so this has been an ongoing issue. We passed a complete ban on this chemical off the House floor last session, and the same bill didn't pass in the Senate. And so we essentially didn't get anything passed last year. And so kind of throughout this whole time since this really came to light, there's been a really active neighborhood group who's been working on this. Representative Amy Wozlowick, who represents White Bear Township and White Bear Lake, has really sort of been the lead on the House end, working on this issue. And so there have been, I don't know, over a dozen different bills and sort of iterations of how to address TCE. Obviously, the company and the Chamber of Commerce and some business owners who use the chemical, don't want to have to change what they're doing. Part of the reason that it's used is that it's, business tend to do the most cost-effective thing. But as we saw with what happened with water gremlin, is that we can't have that be at the expense of human health. And, we have this situation where the chemical was released into the air for almost 2 decades. And it's almost this impossible situation where we have people with different cancers and problems. And it's just really, really unfortunate and really kind of a mess and really unfair to the folks who live in that area. There are many other companies throughout the state who use TCE or very similar chemicals. And so we've been trying to, because there are alternatives available. It's just a matter of, companies who use TCE might have to change, they'd have to change the chemical that they're using. They might have to change some of their equipment, some of their practices. And, some of those businesses don't want to have to change what they're doing. And so it's really been a challenge to reach agreement on this issue. I think partially because sort of just from a philosophical point of view, there are some folks who think that companies should be more regulated, and some people who think that companies should be less regulated. And then, when we have bad actors, we deal with that when it happens. I'm pretty hopeful that we'll get something through. I just don't know what version we'll end up with at the end. Again, we're one of the few states with a divided legislature and sort of different philosophical views of how we deal with a problem like this. But it is very much on our must-do list in the House as something that we absolutely want to make sure we address this session. And so it kind of remains to be seen. We've been on a lot of calls and a lot of discussion with Minnesota Pollution Control and local folks to try to make sure that we get something that's meaningful. Because what I don't want to see happen is that we sort of pass something that gives a whole bunch of outs for companies. For instance, a lot of times when we look at bills where we're regulating the use of different chemicals, if there's language in there that says, oh, well, if it's too hard to do this, then you don't have to, or if it's too expensive for you to do this, then you don't have to. Well, that doesn't actually accomplish the goal of keeping those toxic chemicals out of our communities. And so I just want to make sure that whatever we pass is a meaningful impact on protecting people and with really human health being the top priority. Obviously, we want businesses to do well and we want people to have jobs, but not at the expense of the health of the community as well as the workers. Because the other problem with water gremlin is so they make things out of lead, and lead is also obviously very toxic. And so there have been issues there with folks being exposed to, the workers being exposed to lead as well. And interestingly, I toured federal premium ammunition in the last couple of months, kind of before pandemic hit. And obviously they do a lot of work making things out of lead. And I asked them about that, what do you kind of think of this whole situation with water gremlin and, continuing to use lead? And it was really interesting because they were so far on the other end of being careful and making sure that their employees were protected. And that, so, it is possible to use some of these chemicals and do it in a safe way. Our our country uses, we all use a lot of chemicals every day, and plastics, and lead, and all kinds of different things that we do need. But it was just really interesting to see, here's this company that actually takes this very seriously. For instance, they have showers on site, and they have separate clothes for folks, and they just, they pay for lead testing for their employees if they want to be tested, really kind of the other end of the spectrum, and how it is possible to be more responsible, and still be able to for your business to do well. So really hopeful that we'll get something done on TCE this year. We'll keep pushing. We've got about a month left in the regular legislative session, although I do expect that we will be coming back into special session this year. There's going to be things related to COVID-19 that come up that we aren't aware of, whether that's sort of having to do with the emergency orders and funding of different things that we find out that we need as this thing progresses. And so, but yeah, that'll stay a priority. And I see that Curtis Johnson has his hand raised. So if you could, there we go. Go ahead, Curtis.
Okay, just wanted to swing back to internet access through the district. I can talk about what we're doing at those various schools as far as that's concerned. The middle school and high school students already had iPads. We have a one-to-one iPad initiative. Our elementary school students did not, so we had to come up with 1,300 iPads and Chromebooks that we distributed to them. And then we had to find hotspots for those. We surveyed our families, and we were able to come up with the 200 hotspots that we needed for our families that did not have reliable internet. So we have sent those out, and then that has been working pretty well. In addition to just internet access, we're still feeding our children. They're our kids. So there's still 24 places throughout the district that if the kid needs food, they can come pick it up, and there are no questions asked. Since March 18th, we have delivered 45,000 meals. We average 2,500 meals a day that we give to kids, and we will continue to do that, through the end of the school year. With the governor's new information that he delivered today, we do have a couple things we got to figure out. How we're going to handle this over the summer regarding food. We've always had programs. How much are we going to have to ramp up to continue that? Whether we're going to be using, for our high schoolers, are we going to go pass fail, or are they going to get grades straight up? And we haven't had to discuss that yet, so we will be discussing that, no doubt, in the next week or so. So that will be fun. But that being said, I know that the teachers, everybody in the district is working really hard, and I do want to give a shout out to all the parents who are helping their kids and working and just trying to make all of this work in a COVID-19 world. It's not easy. I've got two kids. They're older, so it's just a different, they're in high school, so different set of challenges. But we get it. We support you truly. If there's anything more that we can do, please let us know, because we're here to help. That's all.
Thank you, Curtis. And I thank you for bringing up the meals that are available through our schools as well. I know, so our district, so 42B, includes parts of 3 different school districts. And so Curtis is one of our school board members in Roseville area schools, but I know that Mounds View and the White Bear area schools are also providing meals to kids. And I think most of them, it's like you don't have to prove that you're a student there. It's like if you're a kid and you show up, they will give you a bag with meals. And I think the way that is rolled out is different for each school district, but I know that that's been a priority for all of our school districts in our area, which is really great. And I'll just on the distance learning thing, I think it's been really hard, but I think it's also both an appreciation for the work that our teachers are doing every day with whole classrooms of students and our teaching assistants. And I know it's sort of, for me too, it's sort of brought out different things in my kids that I didn't realize. I've never been this closely connected to exactly what they were learning in school. And so I think that part has been really interesting. Just a funny thing with our family is my 3rd grader was really didn't have a good attitude about school for a while in this distance learning thing. And we had sort of done the whole thing where each of our kids had a desk in their room they could have their iPad and their pencils and everything. And I finally figured out this week, in week 4, that he's one of those people who probably will thrive while doing his homework when he's in college in a busy coffee shop. So sort of sitting in his quiet room wasn't working for him. So now he and I sort of co-work together, where he's got his iPad and I've got my laptop and I'm answering things and he's doing his thing, and he does better when he's got someone else next to him. Our kids are used to being in classrooms full of their friends, and when they're doing their work, they're chit-chatting and talking to each other about what they're doing. And here, we put him in his room and told him to do his work. So just sort of a funny thing that we've learned about our kids, and it's just it takes time to figure those things out. And I'm sure the challenges that everybody's going through right now, whether you have kids or not, I think everybody's got their different things that they're dealing with. And I really do think too, I just want to sort of call out that not to minimize, I'm very, we're very thankful that we have things like the internet, and we have a safe house to be in, and we have access to food and a yard and all those things, and certainly very grateful for the things that we do have, but also, not minimizing how hard this is for everybody. We're all sort of going through this. It's really sort of a grieving process, for the lives we thought we were going to be leading, and sort of how the reality that we're living in right now. And it's that adjustment is hard, even for those of us with, even for people with not that many things on their plate. It doesn't mean that this is easy. So, we'll get through it together, but it's definitely been a challenge. So our final question, I got a message on the chat, was Randy was asking for an update on bonding bill. And so, Randy, did you have a specific question about a bonding bill, or just, okay. Just to sort of give an update on our bonding bill. I know our bonding chair, Mary Murphy, has been very hard at work, and I know a bonding bill this year is a very high priority. It was even before the pandemic. It was probably our top priority in the legislature, but now I think even more than ever, sort of in a much grander scale than what we talked about at the beginning of this town hall about the LCCMR bill. A bonding bill is really one, it's taking care of things like roads and bridges and our institutions of higher education, and making sure that our buildings are safe and functioning and efficient. But our bonding bill is also, that's jobs. And so, if you sort of look at what has happened at other times when our economy has been in not a great state, putting people to work and having those projects going is incredibly important. And, and we're just at a point where we haven't had robust enough or frequent enough bonding bills sort of I would say at least in the last decade, that there are a lot of projects we really need to get caught up. There are a lot of things, especially, you know, if you look at the U of M and the state of some of our other public buildings kind of statewide, there are, you know, and again, this is also a thing that will impact the whole state. And so there are projects in every region of the state that are ready to go if we can get a bonding bill done. So I'm pretty hopeful we'll get some version. It's always just a question of how big. But I think this year more than ever, I think the argument that, you know, we're not just spending money for the sake of spending money. Obviously, the projects need to happen. The you know, bridges, especially, you know, those kinds of projects like absolutely have to get done from a safety and efficiency standpoint. But I think also it's not lost on me that it's also going to be important work that's being done at a time when we need to make sure that we're doing all we can to make sure our economy is functioning as well as it can. You know, and I think especially there's actually a house being built across the street from me, and certainly those guys have been working this whole time. So I think especially, you know, when it's the type of thing that can be done safely while keeping distance and all that, I think you know, there's a reason that our building and construction and all those things have been essential work from day one of Governor Walz's orders. So fingers crossed. I would like to see a bigger bonding bill. We have not that many local projects this year. We do have I have the Oval in Roseville, which is in need of repairs. Obviously, it's a regionally used facility. That being said, you know, an ice skating place is clearly, you know, not quite the same sort of project as you know, replacing a bridge, but still very important. And I think in our area, actually, you know, sort of the tourism and folks who stay in the hotels in our region and all those sort of things, you know, all those things are part of our economy as well and really important. So still hopeful that we can get that done because and the other piece with the Oval is that if we don't get the bonding dollars, eventually the city of Roseville is going to somebody else is going to have to step up and do it. They essentially can't afford to do that without some pretty major consequences. So we'll keep pushing. We'll keep trying to make sure we can do that. Again, it's something that benefits all Minnesotans. So, okay, Nicole has another. Please weigh in.
Just a quick plug for some of Ramsey County's projects. You know, from a lot of folks about property taxes, and we talked about some of the things we're doing to defer payments. But in general, like if we want to see some more robust property tax relief for Ramsey County being the smallest geographic county with the second largest population, we really need to develop. And so the River's Edge project in St. Paul would be pretty impactful in terms of bringing some development to Ramsey County and really broadening that tax base to relieve some of the pressure I'm hearing on folks. And then also slightly north of us, a 42B, looking at County Road J and 35E, there is a request for us to come up with a proposal for that interchange. It's incredibly unsafe. In fact, while we were at the Senate bonding tour of that intersection, we saw someone blow through one of the stop signs there. And it was, you know, infrastructure that was built back when there was nothing north of County Road J on 35E. So you can't get off on County Road J if you're coming from Hugo or Forest Lake. And there is a lot of manufacturing there that wants to expand, which again, expanding our tax base in Ramsey County, but they can't do it without the ability to build their staff and to make it easy for them to get there. And on top of that, we're going to need to come up with a really interesting design solution, which is why we need the design funds, because it needs to be obviously safe for everyone, but we've got the added piece of large manufacturing trucks coming in and out, and then a retirement community. And then North Oaks is looking at developing all along of that stretch of Centerville. So a lot happening right there, a lot of opportunities for development and expanding that tax base, but getting that infrastructure built to manage that is really important. So those are my plugs for 2 Ramsey County projects.
Yeah, so just a great example of how it's really important to have an engaged county commissioners and school board members, and how we all sort of work together, and all of this really is a team effort in our area. You know, we're all have our different roles to play, but, you know, really important, you know, in order to do those things that impact those local cities, the county needs to be involved, and you know, we need to help with getting the funding. And so I will end on that note of us continuing to work together on things. Oh, Lonnie has one final word from Lonnie.
Thank you, Curtis and Jamie, for talking about the school district. And I know that you folks are working hard with that. And as a retired Roseville teacher, very proud of it. Roseville has always had my heart. But I found this on the, someone sent it to me yesterday. It says, it's a poster. It says, if you see my kids locked outside today, mind your own business. We are having a fire drill. #homeschool.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was...
Thank you. Yeah, very glad. At least it's spring, and we've had some nice warm weather. I tell my kids they got to help me in the garden. It's science class, so
yeah, because no doubt school they haven't had their quota of fire drills. They're supposed to have 9 in a year,
right?
and so they definitely have missed some.
Yeah, maybe I might use that trick this afternoon.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for participating and listening. Again, we will post this online for other folks, or if you want to go back and relive this meeting, it will be available. And we're hoping when we repost it, we'll be able to add some closed captioning as well. So thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your week.